The pharmacist said $47.12, and the man in front of him didn't move. Not because he was slow, not because he hadn't heard. He had heard perfectly well. He just stood there, both hands flat on the counter, looking at the white paper bag sitting between them, like it was something he needed to make peace with before he could touch it. His name was Aldwin Samuels, 61 years old. Retired sergeant, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, 2 tours Bosnia, 1 in Afghanistan, a body that remembered all 3 in the cold months. He had a limp in his left leg that he never explained to anyone, a hearing aid in his right ear that he wore only when he absolutely had to, and a winter coat so old the lining had separated at the seams and hung down inside the sleeve like a ghost. The pharmacist, a young man, maybe 26, name tag, said Kevin, repeated himself with the kind of careful patience that is not quite kindness. 4712, sir. Samuels reached into the breast pocket of his coat and pulled out a wallet that had been brown once, a long time ago. He opened it with the methodical attention of someone who already knew what was in it and needed a moment anyway. There were 2 20s, 1 5, and some coins folded in the bill section because the coin pouch had split years ago, and he'd never replaced the wallet. He counted it out onto the counter. $40. He went back in. He laid down the 5. He found the coins. A toonie, 2 loonies, that was $48. He was going to be fine. Except the coins kept coming. A dime, a nickel. He was counting them out of his palm one by one, and the line behind him had 4 people in it now, and Aldwin Samuels was the kind of man who had spent 40 years never asking anyone for anything, and he was standing at a pharmacy counter at 4:45 in the afternoon counting nickels for his blood pressure medication. The man standing directly behind him was named Cormac Bonsu, 38 years old. He was wearing work boots still dusted from the sight, a Carhartt jacket with a tear at the right elbow, a toque pulled down over close-cropped hair. He was holding a single item, a bottle of children's Tylenol, and he had been watching Aldwin Samuels for about 90 seconds with the focused quiet of someone trying to understand something. He had not said anything yet. He was not the kind of man who spoke before he understood the situation. Cormac Bonsu had grown up in Scarborough, the third of 4 children raised by his mother after his father left when Cormac was 9. His mother had worked 2 jobs for 11 years. He had watched her count coins at a grocery checkout when he was 12 years old, and he had felt, even then, the particular shame of it. Not the poverty itself, but the exposure of it, the way a line of strangers behind you turns into a kind of audience without meaning to. He had never forgotten that, not once in 26 years. Kevin said it again. Still patient, still professional. Sir, it's $47.12. Samuels looked at his hand. He had $47.10. He was 2 cents short. He looked up. Something moved across his face, not embarrassment exactly, but something older and quieter than embarrassment. Something that looked like a man deciding in real time whether to explain himself or to simply absorb it. Can I? He started. Cormac Bonsu had already stepped forward. He didn't push past. He didn't make it a moment. He simply reached around Samuel's left side, placed a $5 bill flat on the counter next to the coins, and said to Kevin, "Keep the change," with the tone of someone finishing a sentence that had already been started. Then he stepped back. Kevin looked at the 5, looked at Cormac, processed it, nodded, picked up the bills and the coins together. Samuel stood very still. He turned around slowly. Cormac was already looking at the rack of reading glasses to his left with the studied casualness of a man who had not done anything worth looking at. "You didn't have to do that," Samuel said. Cormac looked at him. "I know. I had it. I know you did." Samuels looked at him for a long moment. Cormac held the look without flinching, without smiling, without making it into something it wasn't. "You served?" Samuels asked. He didn't know why he asked that, he just knew. "No," Cormac said. "My uncle did. 2 tours with the Van Deuce." He paused. "I know the coat." His PPCLI cap, the one he'd worn for 20 years, sat on his head so naturally he sometimes forgot he was wearing it. Kevin slid the white paper bag across the counter. Samuels picked it up and held it in both hands. "Thank you," he said, and Cormac Bonsu could hear in those 2 words everything the man was not saying, which was quite a lot. "Take care of yourself," Cormac said. Samuels nodded once, the nod of one man to another across some distance that words don't quite cross, and walked toward the door. What Cormac did not know, standing at that pharmacy counter in Sudbury on a Thursday in February, was that Aldwin Samuels had driven 40 minutes to get there. He lived alone in a house outside Chelmsford, off a road that the county plowed last among all the roads it maintained. His wife, Loretta, had died 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 11 months from diagnosis to the end. His daughter, Renee, lived in Vancouver. They talked on Sundays, usually. Sometimes Tuesdays. He had a dog named after a general whose name is not important to this story, and he had a wood stove he kept going all winter, and he had a pension that came in on the 15th and covered most things, most months. This month, the furnace had needed a part. The part had cost $312. He'd paid it because he had to, because February in Chelmsford without heat is not a philosophical problem, it's a medical one. And then he had looked at what was left and done the math and driven 40 minutes to the pharmacy on a Thursday afternoon to pick up the prescription he'd been putting off for 2 weeks. He didn't tell Renee about the furnace. He didn't tell anyone. He was not a man who told people things. He had been decorated twice during his service, once for an action in the Medak pocket in 1993 that he did not discuss, and once for pulling 2 members of his section from a vehicle in Afghanistan in 2007 that had hit something it shouldn't have hit. He had a shadow box in the spare bedroom that held those decorations. He never went in that room anymore. That was the room where Loretta had kept her sewing things, and it still smelled like her, a little, in the way rooms hold on to people longer than anyone expects. He drove home from the pharmacy in the last of the afternoon light, the white paper bag on the passenger seat, and he thought about the young man in the Carhartt jacket. He thought about the way he'd stepped up without making it a scene, without the pity look, without the speech. His uncle did 2 tours with the Van Dews. Samuels knew what that meant. He knew what it cost a family, a young one, to send someone away twice. He knew what it made you into, watching that. He thought about that the whole drive home. What Samuels did not know was that Cormac Bonsu had his own drive home to think about things. He worked construction. Project foreman now had been for 6 years, which meant he was the man the site manager called when something went wrong, and also the man the crew blamed when the schedule slipped, and he had learned to exist comfortably in that particular pinch. He was good at his job. He was the kind of good that other people noticed before he did, which meant he was also occasionally resented for it by the people who'd been there longer and moved up slower. There was a man on his crew named Dale Fitch, who had been making comments for 3 months. Small ones. The kind that can always be walked back. The kind that are designed to be walked back because the point isn't the comment, the point is the accumulation. For a guy who went to Algonquin, you sure don't know how to read a drawing, that kind of thing. Said with a laugh, always with a laugh. Cormac had said nothing about it, not to the site manager, not to anyone. He was the kind of man who believed deeply, and perhaps too stubbornly, that he should be able to handle his own situations. His mother had raised him with that belief. You earn your place. You hold your ground. You don't go looking for someone to solve your problems. But it was wearing on him. He would not have said that out loud. He was wearing it anyway. He had a daughter. Her name was Isla, 5 years old. She had her mother's laugh and his stubbornness and was therefore a force of nature. And a partner named Jillian, who taught high school English in Sudbury and came home every day with the particular tiredness of someone who has spent 7 hours trying to convince teenagers that words matter. He loved them in the specific way of a man who knows exactly what he would lose if something went wrong. That knowledge sat in him every day like ballast. He bought the children's Tylenol because Isla had a fever. He paid for it and drove home and didn't think about the pharmacy much, not the old veteran, not the $5, until Gillian asked him how his day was, and he found himself telling her the whole thing. She listened. She had the gift of listening without interrupting, which was part of why he'd fallen in love with her. When he finished, she said, "He had the look." "Yeah," Cormac said. "He had the look. Your mom had that look sometimes." "I know." He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. The following Tuesday, Cormac Bonsu walked into a Tim Hortons on LaSalle Boulevard at 7:15 in the morning, before the site opened, because he had a supply delivery to sign off on and needed to be there early. He ordered a large double-double and a breakfast sandwich and stood at the end of the counter waiting. Aldwin Samuels was sitting at a table by the window. This is the kind of thing that happens in cities of a certain size. Not small enough to be inevitable, not large enough to be truly impossible. Sudbury is a city where people bump into each other and then try to calculate whether it means something. Samuels was alone. He had a coffee in front of him, half empty. He was reading something on his phone with his reading glasses on. The ones from the drugstore rack. The ones that cost $12 and sit too low on the nose. And he looked perfectly settled, the way a man who is used to being alone in public looks settled. Cormac picked up his order and stood for a moment at the end of the counter. He could have walked out. He almost did. He was not a man who imposed himself. But he thought about his mother at that grocery checkout, and he thought about the fact that the old man had driven 40 minutes in February for a prescription he'd been putting off, and he thought, the least you can do is say hello. Sergeant, from a few feet away so as not to startle him. Samuels looked up. He recognized Cormac immediately. That was clear from his face, and something shifted in his expression, something that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite relief but lived in the neighborhood of both. You again, Samuels said. Me again. Cormac nodded at the empty chair across from. You expecting anyone at 7 in the morning? Samuels said. No. Cormac sat down. They were quiet for a moment in the way that two people who don't know each other are quiet, each one feeling out the edges of the situation, deciding how much of themselves to put into it. How's the medication working? Cormac asked. Samuels looked at him sideways, not offended. Amused, almost. You always ask strangers about their prescriptions? Only when I've helped pay for them. Samuels made a sound that was not quite a laugh. It's fine. It's working. Thank you. Again, you don't have to keep thanking me. I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to. Cormac drank his coffee. Outside, the morning traffic on LaSalle moved the way Sudbury morning traffic moves in winter. A little slow, a little careful. Everyone accounting for ice. PPCLI? Cormac said. Samuels touched the cap. Where were you? Bosnia, Afghanistan, a few other places that aren't interesting to talk about. He paused. Your uncle, Van Duce, R, 22ER, yeah. Maurice Osibonzu, he's in Quebec City now. Teaches high school history. Good for him. He says the same thing about Kandahar that you say about your places. He would, Samuel said. That's how you know he was actually there. There was a pause. It was a comfortable pause. That happens sometimes between certain kinds of people. The silence comes in, and neither paw fights it. You live here? Cormac asked. Chelmsford. Outside it. Long drive. Not bad. I don't mind driving. Cormac looked at him. He was trying to figure something out, and he wasn't sure if it was his business to figure it out. You have family here? He asked, carefully. Samuels was quiet for a moment. Daughters in Vancouver. Wife passed. 4 years ago, was cancer. She went the way she'd have wanted to, at home, not in a hospital. That matters more than people think. Cormac nodded. You? Samuels asked. Partner. 1 daughter. She's 5. She had a fever last Thursday. Hence the Tylenol. She okay? She's fine. Tokens person I know, and I work construction. Samuel smiled at that. A real one. It changed his whole face. They talked for 45 minutes. Cormac was 20 minutes late to the supply delivery and didn't care even a little. Here is what you should understand about Cormac Osibonzu. He was not a man given to grand gestures. The $5 at the pharmacy counter was not to him a grand gesture. It was the minimum decent thing, done without ceremony. He would have been embarrassed to have it described any other way. But the 45 minutes in Tim Hortons, that was something different. That was a choice. That was him saying, with his time, which is the most honest currency any of us have, you are worth sitting with. He had learned that from watching his mother give her time to people who had no obvious claim on it. A neighbor down the hall who couldn't manage the stairs. A woman at church who'd outlived everyone she knew. His mother would sit with these people and drink their tea and listen to their stories, and she had never once described it as charity or sacrifice or anything with a name. She would just say, "That's Marvella. I go see her on Wednesdays." That was all. No explanation needed. Cormac drove to the site thinking about the old sergeant eating alone at a Tim Hortons in Sudbury on a Tuesday morning, and something settled in him that he hadn't been able to name all week. The next 3 weeks were unremarkable in the way that most of life is unremarkable, full of things that matter and leave no visible mark. Cormac managed the site. He dealt with Dale Fitch, not by confronting him, but by performing his job so precisely and so visibly well that the comments slowly lost their footing, like a man trying to argue with a fact. He signed off on drawings. He caught a structural error in a load calculation that would have caused serious problems in April and said nothing about it to anyone except the engineer. He went home every evening and had dinner with Gillian and Isla and bathed the 5-year-old force of nature and felt, on the whole, like a man who was doing all right. He thought about Samuels occasionally. He didn't do anything with the thought. Then one Saturday morning in March, his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number. Osi Bonsu? The voice was careful and direct in the way of a man who had spent decades giving and receiving information precisely. This is Aldwin Samuels. You left your number on the receipt at Tim's. The server gave it to me. I hope that's not too strange. It's not too strange, Cormac said. I wanted to ask you something. A pause. I have a pile of firewood that needs splitting. I've got a bad leg and I can't do it myself, and I will not pay someone $60 an hour to do something I've been doing since I was 12 years old. I was wondering if you had any inclination to come out to Chelmsford on a Saturday and do something useful. Cormac looked at the window. March in Sudbury, gray sky, ice still on the driveway, Isla's drawings taped to the glass. You offering breakfast? He said. I'm offering coffee and the satisfaction of honest work. That might be enough. He drove out to Chelmsford the following Saturday with Isla in the back seat, because Gillian had a marking pile she'd been carrying around like a stone, and he wanted to give her the house. Samuels met them at the door in his coat and boots, already ready to go, and looked at Isla with the careful attention of a man who had not been around small children in some time. Isla looked back at him with the frank and total assessment of a 5-year-old. You're old, she said. Isla, Cormac said. She's not wrong, Samuels said, and opened the door wider. The wood was behind the house, stacked and ready to be split, and there was a splitting axe leaning against the fence post that was older than Cormac and had clearly been maintained with considerable care. Cormac took off his jacket and got to work. Samuel stood at the fence and watched and drank his coffee, and Isla sat on a stump and narrated proceedings. That one was good. That one was bad. Try again. And the dog, whose name turned out to be Diefenbaker, sat beside her and confirmed her assessments by looking interested or uninterested as the moment required. They worked for 2 hours. Samuels talked about Bosnia a little, not the action, but the landscape, the cold, the particular way winter in the Balkans felt different from winter in Ontario, heavier somehow, more permanent. Cormac talked about Scarborough, about growing up there, about the way the city had changed and the way it hadn't. Samuels asked questions the way a man does when he is genuinely curious, not when he is filling time. At noon, they went inside, and Samuels made lunch. Soup from a pot that had been going since that morning, brown bread, butter, and set out 3 bowls, including one sized for a 5-year-old, which he had clearly thought about in advance. Cormac noticed that. He didn't say anything. After lunch, while Samuels was washing up and Isla was interrogating Diefenbaker about his daily schedule, Cormac looked around the kitchen. It was a clean, spare kitchen, the kind that belongs to someone who has been alone long enough to stop setting the table for 2, but not long enough to have stopped caring about the maintenance of things. There was a framed photo on the windowsill. A woman, maybe 55 in the photo, with her arm around a younger Samuels, both of them squinting into some bright summer somewhere. The kind of photo you keep where you'll see it every morning. He didn't stare. He looked once and looked away. On the drive home, with Isla asleep in her car seat and the highway stretching out gray and flat under the March sky, Cormac thought about what Samuels had said while they were splitting wood. He hadn't said it dramatically. He'd said it the way you say something you've been thinking about for a while. I was a good soldier. I was never sure what that made me as a person. Loretta used to say it made me exactly who I was supposed to be. I'm still working out if she was right. Cormac had not answered immediately. He had split a log cleanly, stacked the pieces, and said, "Sounds like she knew you pretty well." And Samuels had said, "Better than I did." There are things people tell you that stay with you, not because they're surprising, but because they're true in a way that lands differently when you're standing next to someone rather than reading it. Cormac thought about that statement for the rest of March. He thought about Gillian, who also knew him better than he knew himself, and what that meant, and what it cost her, and what he owed her for it. He thought it was one of the more useful afternoons he'd had in a long time. In April, the snow finally left Chelmsford in the serious way. Not just retreating to the edges, but actually going, and the road to Samuel's house became passable without the particular concentration it had required all winter. Cormac drove out on a Saturday in April with a case of Molson and no particular plan, and found Samuels in the yard looking at the garden beds with the expression of a man taking inventory. "Loretta's garden," Samuels said when he saw Cormac looking. "You keep it up?" "I've been trying." A pause. "I'm not a gardener." She was. He looked at the beds. "But I figure it's the least I can do." They sat on the back steps and drank a beer and didn't say very much, which is a thing that is undervalued between men and shouldn't be. Later, Cormac helped him turn the beds. It was the wrong time to plant anything, still too cold in the mornings, but the soil needed turning anyway, and they turned it. Diefenbaker supervised. On the drive home, Cormac called his uncle Maurice in Quebec City. He hadn't called in 6 weeks. Maurice answered on the second ring, which he always did because Maurice Bonsu was the kind of man who picked up the phone. "Nephew," he said. "Uncle Maurice," Cormac said. "You doing all right? Come see, come sa. The kids are going to kill me by June. Tell me something good." So Cormac told him about Samuels, the pharmacy, the Tim Hortons, the firewood and the soup and the garden beds. Maurice listened without interrupting. When Cormac finished, Maurice was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know what I learned over there? The ones who look like they're holding it together the best are the ones who've just had more practice not asking for help." "Yeah," Cormac said. "I figured." "You're a good man," Maurice said. "Your mother did all right with you. Don't tell her that. She'll think she can stop working on me." Maurice laughed. It was the laugh Cormac remembered from childhood, the one that started somewhere low and worked its way up. In May, Cormac brought Gillian to Chelmsford. He'd told her about Samuels, and she'd said simply, "I'd like to meet him," which was the kind of thing Gillian said when she meant it. Samuels made dinner. He was a better cook than he let on. A simple meal, well executed, the kind that tells you the cook has been doing it a long time and cared enough to learn it properly. He and Gillian talked for an hour about things Cormac only half followed. Books, mostly, and then the school system, and then the particular challenges of teaching history to people who don't believe they have any. And Cormac sat across from them and drank his coffee and felt the specific contentment of watching two people he respected finding their way to each other. After dinner, while Gillian was in the kitchen with Samuels doing the dishes, she had insisted, in the tone that means the conversation is over. Cormac went into the hallway and, almost without meaning to, found himself looking through the open door of the spare room. The shadow box was on the shelf, 2 decorations. The room still had Loretta's things in it, folded fabric, a sewing basket, a quilt half done on a frame that hadn't moved in 4 years. He didn't go in, he just looked. When Samuels came out of the kitchen, he found Cormac standing in the hallway and followed his gaze through the door. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "The medic pocket," he said, nodding at the shadow box. "And Kandahar." Another pause. "Most days I don't think about it. Some days I do." "Do you talk to anyone?" Cormac asked, carefully. "I talk to you," Samuels said. Cormac looked at him. "I mean it," Samuels said. "You and that dog are the only ones I've had a real conversation with in." He stopped, recalculated. Longer than I should say out loud. Cormac was quiet. He was working through something. "I'm going to give you a number," he said. "You don't have to call it, but I want you to have it." He pulled out his phone. "It's a veteran services line. One of the guys on my crew, not the idiot, a different one. He called them last year. Said it was better than he expected." Samuels looked at him for a long moment. The same look from the pharmacy counter. Not embarrassed, but something older and quieter than embarrassment. "You're not going to stop showing up whether I call or not," he said. "No," Cormac said. "That's a separate thing." Samuels took the number. The next time Cormac Bonsu's daughter Isla asked him what he was doing on a Saturday morning, he told her they were going to visit his friend. "The old man," she said. "Aldwin," he said. She considered this. "Does he still have Diefenbaker?" "He does." "Okay," she said, and went to get her boots. That is the whole of it, really. There is no tidy resolution to offer, no moment where everything was repaid and balanced. Life does not organize itself that way. What happened instead was this. A man who had spent 31 years learning how to be alone with difficulty found, in the space of 1 winter and 1 spring, that the difficulty was slightly more bearable when there was someone willing to drive out on a Saturday morning and split wood and eat soup and ask real questions and show up again the following week. and a man who had grown up watching his mother count coins at a grocery checkout, who had spent his whole adult life trying to be exactly the kind of man his mother had always believed he was, discovered that the most useful version of that man was not the one who saved the day. It was the one who showed up for the ordinary Tuesdays. There's a line people use sometimes about service members, about what they're owed, about the debt society carries. Cormac Osebonsu did not think in those terms. He thought in smaller ones. He thought, the next time you're standing in a line and someone in front of you is counting too carefully, don't look at your phone, he thought. It costs you nothing to see someone. He thought this, and then he drove to Chelmsford, and Isla sat in the back with her boots still untied because she could never be bothered. And Diefenbaker met them at the gate, and Aldwin Samuels was standing on the back steps in the May morning light, looking like a man who had somewhere to be.